Welcome to the Cross Creek On Demand podcast, a podcast for you because God is for you. In this episode, we continue our series, Revelation, How to Live Through the End of the World. And this is part 4, How the Church Resists Babylon. We'll see that Babylon, the system opposed to God, is always trying to infiltrate the church. But Jesus calls us to resist, not by retreating or fighting culture wars, but by becoming a worshiping community shaped by love, truth, and the courageous way of Jesus. It's about choosing allegiance, not to empire, but to the Lamb. Worship isn't just singing songs, it's how we join Jesus in dismantling Babylon here and now. So, let's talk about it together.
Across cultures and across time, there's a story that keeps resurfacing and stirring our hearts and our imaginations to something greater. Did you know that? It's like this imprinted human story. In fact, there is a story that seems to be written in our DNA. So think about it. Maybe even think about some of your favorite stories. There's this story that's sunk into our DNA. You can go back to the Iliad, right? Written by Homer, ancient Greeks. Right, a coalition of Greek warriors fighting against the mighty empire of Troy. You go to the Jewish scriptures of Exodus, the enslaved Israelites going against the mighty empire of Egypt. Les Miserables. I don't say it with the French accent. But the small group of revolutionaries rising against oppression in 19th century France. You seeing a theme here? How about the great Lord of the Rings? Right? The forces of evil want to take over Middle-earth, but they're stopped by these small hobbits in an alliance of humans and elves. Star Wars, a small group of... What's that? Get out. Star Wars, a small group of rebels taking on the evil empire. Harry Potter, X-Men, a persecuted group fights against oppression and evil. See, these stories that we love stir something in us, stir something deep in us, a desire to resist evil, fight for freedom, and give ourselves to a greater purpose. And we are drawn, I think we are drawn to these stories because they are shadows of the real story of the universe, the story that the book of Revelation reveals to us. See, we're going through a kind of overview of the book of Revelation because often it gets misused. And it's a book that's supposed to be used. See, Revelation wasn't written to help us predict the future. That was not the point of the book. Revelation was written to reveal the story of the universe, a story we all have a part in. It actually reveals the story of the universe and our story at the same time. But to understand this book, it's a very different type of book than what we're used to reading. To understand it, we need to step into the world in which it was written. Because the book of Revelation was written to real people in 7 real cities. Like people like us. They had families. They had jobs. They had hopes. They had dreams. They had fears. And though they were under the control of the Roman Empire, they dared to declare that Jesus, not Caesar, was the true king of the world. They refused to worship the emperor, they refused to worship the empire or the idols of the Roman gods, or even participate in the cultic practices of their neighbors. And this brought persecution. It brought scorn, it brought mockery, it brought loss of income, and sometimes loss of life. And some of these people in these 7 churches, they stayed strong, but others began cracking under the pressure. And Revelation is Jesus' handbook on how to be his rebels in a world opposed to his kingdom. That's why it was written, to be a handbook to his rebels, living under the thumb of the evil empire that's opposed to his kingdom. And that's why we're teaching this, because this evil empire that we'll see, it spans all of time. And so we're going through this to learn how to use this book, not just so I can teach it to you verse by verse. And so in the first part of this book, this is actually part 4. So if you're new or you're listening online, these are all online on youtube.com/yourcrosscreek, our podcast. And wherever else you get your podcasts, right? Spotify. Yeah, it is. iHeartRadio? Yeah. iHeartRadio? Yeah. It is, but now we're big time. So anyway, if you missed some and you're kind of confused, go back to those. But in the first part of this letter, or actually in the first part of this handbook to rebels, Jesus writes a letter to each of these 7 churches I mentioned. And this section that we're going to talk about a little bit, this is probably the most taught section of Revelation. In fact, and I'm not knocking anybody, but when I see a church be like, we're going to teach on Revelation, they go to the first 2, 3, maybe up to the first 5 chapters, and then they stop. Because the first part that we're going to look at, that's kind of like, it almost makes sense to us. It has lessons that we can apply to our life. It's a lot like the other books of the New Testament. And then the rest of the book is weird and scary with all these images and stuff. But I think, and from what I've studied, to be able to hear and understand and apply these letters that we're going to look at fully, we need to be able to zoom out. And we need to see that these weren't just isolated churches having a tough time. There was a bigger enemy at work, an enemy that is still prowling around. So these letters, these 7 letters, were written to churches living inside Babylon. Not ancient Babylon, but the empire of Babylon. This is a system built by the dragon and his beasts. Everyone following along? Let me break it down in case this is new to you. The dragon in Revelation represents Satan himself. He's hell-bent, get it? He's hell-bent on destroying the people of God. And the beasts are rulers and empires given power by the dragon to lead the world. And these are systems that we see spanning throughout time. And so Babylon is the system and culture created by the dragon and his beasts. And so Jesus writes to these churches because what is happening to them is what has been happening in all the centuries since these letters were written. See, the dragon uses Babylon to infiltrate and dominate Jesus' church. The dragon uses Babylon to infiltrate and dominate Jesus' church. Imagine if the people sitting in this room were the only Jesus followers in Salem. And I'm not assuming all of you are Jesus followers, but just assume in this room right now, this was it in Salem. We were the only ones who refused to play the left-right Democrat-Republican game. We're the only ones who refused to give in to the worship and the culture around us. And because of it, this small group, because of it, we were mocked, we were persecuted, and some of you were even killed. Not me, but some of you were even killed. Especially if your phone goes off. But then, how long do you think it would be until we cracked under that pressure? Right? Everyone else is doing something different, and they're looking at us mockingly and with scorn and even threatening our lives. But then, imagine, we get a letter from one of Jesus' actual disciples, naming the Church of Salem, meaning us. And in that letter, it's a message from Jesus himself. That's what these letters are at the beginning of Revelation, are letters from Jesus to these individual churches who are being persecuted for following Jesus. And so these letters were written to individual churches, but they are for every church and every time. Does that make sense? Good. And Jesus encourages most of these churches for their efforts to remain faithful, to hold on to the truth, to persevere even when they feel weak. Here's some examples in Ephesus. He says, I know the things you do. I have seen your hard work and your patient endurance. I know you don't tolerate evil people. You have examined the claims of those who say they are apostles but are not. You have discovered they are liars. You have patiently suffered for me without quitting. And then in Pergamum, I know that you live in the city where Satan has his throne, yet you have remained loyal to me. You refused to deny me even when Antipas, my faithful witness, was martyred among you there in Satan's city. And in Thyatira, I know all the things you do. I have seen your love, your faith, your service, your patient endurance, and I can see your constant improvement in all these things. Wouldn't that be cool to get a letter from Jesus to the Church of Salem? I see what you do. You're holding strong. You're doing great. You're doing all these good things. So Jesus writes to these 7 churches. He commends many of them for clinging to their trust, clinging to their loyalty to him, but he also has a warning for them. He says, hey, Babylon, it's not just out there. It's not just a problem out there. It's already getting into your church communities. And scholar Scott McKnight, in his book, Revelation for the Rest of Us, write that down if you want to go deeper into Revelation. That's one of the main books I've been using, Revelation for the Rest of Us. In his book, he actually shows how there are 4 ways Babylon infiltrates church communities. And so I wanted to look at these, what Jesus has to say about Babylon infiltrating churches. And the first way Babylon infiltrates churches is their love becomes disordered. Their love becomes disordered. And there's a verse that goes with it. He says, I know all the things you do. I have seen your hard work and your patient endurance. I know you don't tolerate evil people. You have examined the claims of those who say they are apostles but are not. You have discovered they are liars. You have patiently suffered from me without quitting. But I have this complaint against you. You don't love me or each other as you did at first. Whew. Other translations say you have lost your first love. Now look at it. This church, these people were doing all the right things. Like he commends them for all these great things they're doing, right? But the motivation, the heart of it wasn't love for God and others. As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13 that maybe was read at your wedding, right actions without love are pointless. See, in Babylon, in this culture that we live in, Babylon says, sure, do good. That's awesome. Yeah, do good for people because it'll make you look good. Right? It speaks to our pride. Do good because it'll get you what you want, greed or lust. It'll make you feel good if you do good things, feeds our selfishness. Or if you don't do these good things, then you'll get in trouble and people will look down on you. So using fear and guilt. And when our motivation is duty or guilt or fear, we will eventually tire and fall. But when we work out of an ongoing and maturing love for God and others, we resist Babylon. So that's what Jesus is calling this church to do. And so the question is on this one is, why do you do the good you do? I know you, a lot of you are great people. You do good things. Why do you do what you do? What is your true motivation for the good you do? Because when love is no longer the root, it goes further. See, when love's no longer the root, truth gets twisted. And that's the second way Babylon infiltrates the church. Teachings become distorted. Teachings become distorted. Revelation 2:14 and 15. But I have a few complaints against you. This is a different church. You tolerate some among you whose teaching is like that of Balaam, who showed Balak how to trip up the people of Israel. He taught them to sin by eating food offered to idols and by committing sexual sin. In a similar way, you have some Nicolaitans among you who follow the same teaching. Super clear, right? What's wrong with them? It's okay. We don't know exactly what those teachings of Balaam and the Nicolaitans were, but the story of Balaam is from the Old Testament. And he convinced the Israelites to worship the gods and sleep with the women of the Moabites, which they weren't supposed to do. The Nicolaitans were most likely people who said it was okay to participate in the Roman cults. Remember, they're living in this world of Roman idolatry and all of that. And so they were probably saying, hey, sacrificing to idols and eating the food sacrificed to idols, no big deal. Participating in the festivals to the gods, that often could include erotic sexual behavior. No big deal, you're just going along to get along. That's just what our culture does, guys. See, it seems some in that church argued, it's fine. We can follow Jesus and still do what everyone else around us is doing. No big deal. As long as we're being good people, as long as we're doing Jesus-y things, it doesn't matter if we participate in this cultural stuff too. But Jesus is saying when we conform to Babylon, it begins to shape us into its image. See, Jesus says either you follow me with all of you, or you are following Babylon. Participation in the empire, he says, is the same as rejecting the way of the Lamb, Jesus. See, it's the way of Babylon and the dragon, or the way of the Lamb. There's no compromise. But Jesus doesn't stop there. See, the lies they tolerated then began to shape their lives. The third way, worship becomes corrupted. Worship becomes corrupted. They start getting drums on the stage and electric. I'm just kidding. Been to some of those. No, their worship becomes corrupted. Here's what it says. But I have this complaint against you. You are permitting that woman, that Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet, to lead my servants astray. She teaches them to commit sexual sin and to eat food offered to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she does not want to turn away from her immorality. And this idea is very similar to the one above. See, worship isn't just singing. It's not just what we did a few minutes ago. Worship is our whole life. It's who and what you are living for. And being a rebel of the Lamb, being part of Jesus' rebellion, means devoting our whole life to the Lamb. And surrendering to and giving our allegiance to anything else is corrupting our worship to the real King. But the difficulty for these churches is that for them, religion and everyday life, they weren't compartmentalized like we can kind of do for ourselves, right? Like, oh, I'm a Christian on Sunday, and then I can go to work and kind of put it over here, and I do this and do that. No, to be a good citizen in Rome, you participated in the religion of the empire. So to reject the empire's militaristic and nationalistic religion was seen as turning your back on your community, turning your back on your nation and your social network and even your family. Like if you don't sacrifice to the gods, then the gods won't bless our country, is what they were saying. And so rebelling against that would require daily and often difficult choices to not go along with the rest of society. What would they choose to be loyal to? Babylon or the way of the Lamb? And it's the same question for us, honestly. What has our loyalty? What has our worship? Our culture? Our country? Our society? Or Jesus? There's nothing wrong with being patriotic, don't hear me wrong. But what has our worship? What has our ultimate allegiance? And once we allow Babylon to shape our lives, it's not long before we start switching loyalties. And so fourth and finally, Babylon infiltrates church communities by having our loyalty divided. Our loyalty becomes divided. Revelation 13. I know all the things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were one or the other. But since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have everything I want, I don't need a thing. You don't realize that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. So I advise you to buy gold from me, gold that has been purified by fire. Then you will be rich. Also buy white garments for me, so you will not be shamed by your nakedness, and ointment for your eyes, so you will be able to see. And here we see one of the most devious ways Babylon infiltrates the churches. Probably the most relevant to us today, I would think. This letter was written to the church at Laodicea, a very wealthy city, actually. They had an earthquake that destroyed the town, and usually when that happened, the Roman Empire would come in and rebuild, give them money to rebuild, and the Laodiceans said, we got it. We're too proud. We don't need your charity, Rome. They rebuilt the city themselves out of their own wealth. Then the church of that very wealthy city had begun to rely on their wealth instead of Jesus. They were self-sufficient, and Jesus was just kind of like a side hobby, right? They had their life that they did, and they kind of sprinkled in a little Jesus on the side. Their loyalty wasn't to Jesus. It was to Babylon's comfort, not the way of the Lamb. And the problem is they were unable to challenge Babylon because they had become part of it. They couldn't challenge the system because now they had become part of the system. And that's the meaning of the lukewarm vomit comment there. See, it's not about being on fire for Jesus, or you'd rather you be on fire or be cold for him. That's how most youth pastors would teach back in my day. I don't know if you grew up in church, but that's actually not what it's talking about. See, Laodicea was in an interesting location geographically. They had a neighboring city that had these famous hot springs that people believed had healing benefits. And they actually built aqueducts to bring these hot springs to Laodicea. But by the time the water got there, it wasn't hot and healing anymore. It was lukewarm. But they had another city, another part on the other side, that had refreshing cold water that they loved that came from a nearby river. And they actually had built an aqueduct to bring that water to Laodicea. But in ancient Turkey's heat, When the water finally got to Laodicea, guess what happened to the water? It was warm. It was no longer refreshing. So Jesus says to them, because you are simply going along with the culture of Babylon, you are neither healing nor refreshing. You're doing nothing for the kingdom of heaven. You're pointless and you're gross. I want to vomit you out. He says, turn back to me, and I'll make you healing and refreshing, effective rebels for me. So, I know this can seem like a lot. Babylon or Jesus, those are your two choices, black and white. We get uncomfortable with that. But we want to play our part in the story, right? We want to play our part in the story of the universe. We want our lives to mean something. We want to be loyal rebels who follow the true king. Yeah, it can feel overwhelming. Like compromise, I think, can feel like inevitable. It's going to happen. It's easy to get tripped up and confused or deceived. And constantly watching for Babylon in our lives can be exhausting. Like doing that could easily turn us into types of people who just shut everything out, right? Afraid that the songs we listen to, if they're played backward, will put demons in us. Or afraid that, if our kids watch Scooby-Doo or the Smurfs, then you're going to be influenced by evil, right? Or lots of other things. Like always looking out for the evil in the culture that might get us because we're going to be susceptible. But after writing these letters, after these letters in the book of Revelation, the story takes an amazing turn. And John, the author, is taken into the ultimate reality, where there's worship going on in the throne room of God, and everything changes. Here's the story. He describes the worship. Day after day and night after night, they keep on saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord the Almighty, the Lord God the Almighty, the one who always was, who is, and who is still to come. Whenever the living beings give glory and honor and thanks to the one sitting on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down and worship the one sitting on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever. And they lay their crowns before the throne and say, you are worthy, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and they exist because you created what you pleased. And then there's another scene. And they sang a new song with these words, you are worthy to take the scroll and break its seals and open it, for you were slaughtered, and your blood has ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have caused them to become a kingdom of priests for our God, and they will reign on the earth. Then I looked again, and I heard the voices of thousands and millions of angels around the throne and of the living beings and the elders, and they sang in a mighty chorus, worthy is the Lamb who was slaughtered to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea, they sang, blessings and honor and glory and power to belong to the one sitting on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. And the four living beings said, amen. And the 24 elders fell down and worshiped the Lamb. And as the story of Revelation keeps unfolding, as the vision continues, it keeps getting interrupted by more singing to God and to the Lamb. And if you actually read through Revelation, it's often tempting to skip these songs. Kind of like the first time if you ever read Lord of the Rings, you're like, oh my gosh, stop singing, right? Just get to the story. Where's the fighting? This wasn't in the movie. But don't skip the songs. See, what do we do with these songs of worship? Why are they there? We let these songs shape us. How do we resist Babylon? We let these songs shape us. See, these aren't just songs from angels, and they're not just happy-pappy songs of comfortable people sitting in luxury. These are songs for rebels who want to stay loyal to the Lamb while still living in Babylon. See, worship shows us Babylon through God's eyes and how to live as rebels inside Babylon. Actually, worshiping shows us the culture through God's eyes and shows us how to actually live as rebels inside Babylon. It transforms us into people who know God is on the throne and the Lamb is the victor, even if we are surrounded by and assaulted by Babylon. And the more this truth seeps into our bones, the more we are capable of living the way of the Lamb. When we worship, we begin to reflect Jesus in our everyday choices, in our everyday lives. It shapes us into people who live like him and love like him and show the world what he is really like. See, all of this following the Lamb, being a Jesus follower, it's not just about believing something. It's about becoming something. Becoming little Jesuses, bringing Jesus' revolution to Babylon. It's doing what Jesus would do if he were living your life. In fact, Christian, the original word Christian actually means little Christ. And it was used as a put down for the first Jesus followers as, oh, you're just little Christs. But they took it on as yes, that is exactly what we are. That's who we are. We're Christians. We're little Christs. Worship. The worship we see in Revelation isn't just singing songs once a week at a church service. See, worship is a life that continually acknowledges, celebrates, and enjoys the goodness and greatness of God. That's a life of worship, one that continually acknowledges, celebrates, and enjoys the goodness and greatness of God. So, the question is, are you ready to move beyond just believing information about Jesus and start living in allegiance to him? Are you ready and willing to become a rebel of Jesus? But listen, when we talk about rebels and fighting, Revelation doesn't call us to be warriors for God. It calls us to be witnesses of the goodness and greatness and love of God. And it's through that witnessing, through lives of worship, that Babylon is resisted and defeated. So are you ready to accept that invitation? Maybe it's time to accept his invitation to follow him for the first time. Maybe something's happened, stirred in your heart, like, yeah, it's time for me to actually take that step. Not just kind of explore, but actually pledge allegiance to Jesus. Are you ready to join his rebellion? You just have to tell him, yes, I commit my allegiance to you. I want you to be my king. Start following him. And if that's you, whether you're sitting here or you're listening online, let me know. You can email us at info@yourcrosscreek.com, and then we can kind of continue this conversation and talk about what it means to follow the Lamb, follow the true King. Because Jesus is calling his followers to be a community not shaped by fear, not shaped by guilt, not shaped by pride, but by courageous compassion and clear allegiance to the Lamb. So what if we could be known not for our outrage, not for our retreat and sticking our heads in the sand, but what if we could be known for our faith-filled resistance to the empire by living and loving like Jesus every day? What if we could be a community who sings the songs of Revelation, not just with our mouths, but with our choices, with our loyalty, with our lives? Like, let's resist Babylon, not just through effort, but through worship. Let's live lives of the Lamb, faithful, truthful, courageous, and surrendered. And so to do that, there's a little assignment. And I'm excited to do this week. For the next 7 days, it's just a week, right? It won't even actually form a habit. I think you need 3 weeks for that. But for just 7 days, read and meditate on a song of rebellious worship. There are these 7 songs I put out on your notes. You don't have to write them down. They're in your notes on the back page. And if you're listening online, it's in the show notes. Those are 7 songs in Revelation, songs of rebellious worship, songs designed to shape the rebels of Jesus. And every day, either before or after you read those, pray this: Jesus, use these songs to shape me into your reliant rebel, to shape me into your reliant rebel. Because these songs are designed to shape us. And this whole thing about resisting, it's not just about individuals resisting and like, oh, I'm not going to do that bad thing. It's about a church. It's about a community. It's about us becoming a group of witnesses who live the way of the Lamb every day. So what would it look like for us to take these letters from Jesus seriously? What if we heard Jesus not just addressing these 7 churches, but actually addressing us? What if we read Revelation not as a mystery to decode, but as a mission to embrace? What if we woke up each day not asking, how do I survive in Babylon and not trip up in sin, but instead we said, how do I follow the Lamb wherever he goes? See, we don't have to be fearful. We don't have to go along to get along. We can change the lives around us by allowing Jesus to change us into his rebels who challenge life in Babylon wherever we encounter it. See, through Jesus, Babylon falls. That's what we're going to talk about next week. But it's not by brute force. It's by the faithful worship of his people. And in the end, worship doesn't just resist Babylon, it lets us participate in destroying it. And Jesus invites all of us to join that rebellion. Look, he says, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. Those who are victorious will sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat with my Father on his throne.